All right. Happy Sunday, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of OZY Fest. How many of you guys got to enjoy OZY Fest yesterday? Any, all right. Anybody dance in the rain with Young the Giant? Any of those folks here? Love the good people who did that. All right, we are going to have a spectacular day 2. Malcolm Gladwell's going to join us. Michelle Wolf's going to be totally inappropriate. We're going to do a little HQ with Scott Rogowski. Jamel Hill will be here. We got Passion Pit. We got Roy Choi. It's going to be a great, great day. But we are going to start it off where we should on a Sunday. We're going to get hot and heated. We got a little politics for you. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming 3 fantastic guests, Chelsea Handler, Tom Styer, and Karl Rove. Come on down. Welcome.
Hello, everybody.
This is going to be fun. Chelsea, I'm going to start with you. I always ask people when we're talking about politics, how did you end up getting interested in the topic? Were you a political junkie from early on?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in politics in the sense that I wanted to participate and vote and lend my voice to causes that I feel passionately about and marginalized communities. But it took a more serious turn after the last election when I was just kind of thunderstruck by how misinformed I was and how little I expected that result to be a reality.
And when you say misinformed, you mean you didn't expect President Trump to win, or you mean in other ways?
No, I didn't think it was possible that we could elect that man.
And there it is. Karl, what about you? How'd you get interested in politics? Did you start early? Did you come to it late? Obviously, a lot of people know your service with President Bush and others, but how did you come to politics to begin with?
Yeah, well, I came early, but I don't know exactly why, because I grew up in a very apolitical family. My mother was completely insane when it came to politics. She voted the straight Republican ticket a year I worked in a Republican campaign, and the next year voted the straight Peace and Freedom Party ticket because my older brother was for Eldridge Cleaver for president. But I became active early as a complete nerd. I had hush puppies and a briefcase in the 4th or 5th grade, and my first civics paper was, you know, when you write that one, you know, the 3 branches of government or whatever. Mine was on the theory of dialectical materialism. I didn't know who this guy Karl Marx was, but he sounded to me like a mean son of a bitch.
And you were in. He sold you. You like the first name too. Tom, what about you? How did you get interested in politics to begin with?
Well, I was a econ poli-sci major in college, so I can't say I never cared, but I started to really care around 2001, 2002, with all due respect to Mr. Rove, when I realized that George W. Bush was going to set the country back 25 years. And I felt like I don't want to sit by and let this happen and have my grandkids ask me, what were you doing, and say I was just watching. So I got very involved in the Kerry campaign to say we need to get this country back on a prosperous, sane path. And as we all know, John Kerry didn't get elected president.
How surprised were you that President Trump won? If I had talked to you on Election Day in 2016, Chelsea said she was surprised. Karl, I assume you were surprised that President Trump won. How surprised were you?
Trump was surprised.
So like everybody. Okay.
Look, I think if you looked at any kind of evidence, you would have said it was odds against. I think that there was a huge amount of arrogance and overconfidence on the Democratic side. I think that they were out of touch with the people of the United States. And the result was that somebody got elected who, you know, from my point of view, should never have been elected, and now we have to deal with it.
Chelsea, how bad in your mind have things gotten versus maybe even what you expected? I could tell you were heartbroken election night, but has it gotten worse as the year and a half has gone along? Is it as bad?
It gets worse almost daily, I would say. And I mean, it's astonishingly bad, and it is a stain on American history, you know, and it's not something, there are silver linings to what has happened. There are so many movements happening that are undeniable. There is a wave of women and people of color being elected at every special election, and that will carry through until...
Woohoo!
And And that's fucking awesome, okay? We have more people running for office than have ever ran for office, more first-time candidates. We need to get out establishment people who have been there for years and years and years, and old white men that are running this country are not reflective of what this country looks like.
All right, Carl, so when you hear that, you say what?
Welcome to the political scene. Glad you're all there, and I want you to keep doing what you're doing, because between the Hudson River and Santa Monica, the over-the-top attacks on Trump. I'm not a fan of Trump. I thought he was going to lose, and I thought he deserved to lose after the Billy Bush tape. But the things that are being said about him today are so far over the top that you've actually succeeded in making him, in some circles, a sympathetic figure. On Election Day, 56% of the American people had an unfavorable opinion of him. 54% had an unfavorable opinion of her. By comparison, in 1972, 21% had an unfavorable opinion of George McGovern. And in 1964, 26% had an unfavorable opinion of Barry Goldwater. The Democrats succeeded in nominating the one person whom Donald Trump could beat, and he beat her. And they're on the path to do it again with the election this year is going to be settled, and the election in 2020 is going to be settled not by people who hate his guts, but by people who want to see somebody step forward who will bring the country together and do positive and constructive things for the country's future. Not people who are out there ranting and raving and like a lot of people are. This week in Texas, thank you for giving us an absolute win in the Senate race, because Robert Francis Beto O'Rourke came out for the impeachment of Donald Trump in a red state like Texas. Now, yeah, so it ain't going to go over great. Of course, Texas is sort of weird because we got the Anglo Robert Francis O'Rourke running as Beto, and we got the Hispanic Rafael Cruz running as Ted. Only in Texas could we pull off something like that.
So Tom, how right is Carl? Have Democrats been over the top, and does that put Democrats at risk? You've been a leader in calling for President Trump's impeachment. You did it early. You did it even when some of the leaders in the congressional Democrats said, bad idea, don't do that, stay away from that. Is Carl right? Over the top?
Carl is obviously, in my opinion, dead wrong. Let me talk for a second about 18 and what's going on now, and then let's talk about 20, because we're talking about two different times. This is a president who has met the criteria for impeachment. This is a guy who breaks the law every day. So that when you think about impeachment, you have to break it down into, has he met the grounds to be impeached? And we asked 74 scholars, constitutional scholars, that question, and they overwhelmingly said yes. If you want to go on our website, Need to Impeach, you can lose an hour and a half of your life and be convinced. The second question you have to ask is about urgency. And if you think about urgency, let's talk about the last month. The last month started with this administration having internment camps for children on the border. That's something I went down to the border, and the head of Catholic Relief Services described separating children from their parents as torture. This month ended with this president on a stage with Vladimir Putin denying what everybody in the intelligence agencies of the United States says is true, denying that it's ongoing, and saying if there's a problem between Russia and the United States, it's the United States' fault. So when Karl Rove says this is a distraction, this is good for Republicans, I would say we're telling the truth, we're standing up for the American people and the American democracy, and that seems to me to be a good strategy. That's the strategy that's animated this country for 200 years. But Karl made one very good point, which is this: Americans need to see a positive vision for the 21st century. And we're not getting it. He's dead right about that. And that's what we're going to need to see in 2020, is a democratic explanation of how we're going to make this another American century and continue the American experiment positively for everybody.
Chelsea, how do Democrats have a risk? One of the things Carl said was that Democrats may have nominated the wrong candidate, may have nominated the one person who couldn't beat Donald Trump. And one of the things that we saw here in New York with the one young woman named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is we saw someone run strongly to the left, beat an incumbent Democrat. And so do we need do Democrats need more of that if they are to win? Are those the kinds of candidates? You talked about women, you talked about people of color. You didn't mention whether they should be middle of the road, further left.
I don't think there's one prescription for the entire country. I think every district is different, and certain districts require more liberal candidates, and some districts aren't ever going to go for that. You know, you have to be also realistic about who's going to win in the general election. You know, we can't just vote for people because we like their politics, but they don't have a chance of beating a Republican in a Republican-led district. So, or a district that voted for Trump, or that Trump won by a certain amount of points. I think you actually have to look around and be case-specific for each. You know, there are some candidates that are a little bit more middle of the road than I am that I'm supporting because I know that they can actually win it, and I believe that they can win it. So, I mean, it's not a blanket, you know, there's not one blanket methodology for this election. And I think trying to decide if we're going to be real left or if we're going to be middle left is also a waste of time.
All right, let me ask you guys, so if you're a supporter of the president, so not if you oppose the president, if you're a supporter of the president, you could say this about the world. You could say, or at least about the U.S., you could say the economy is strong, unemployment's low. You could say the stock market's high. You could say people thought nothing was ever going to happen in North Korea, and it looks like he may have made movement there. Let me give the argument so you guys can hear it. You could say that, again, you're a supporter of the president. You're a strong supporter of the president. You came out, you voted, you got excited about him. You're still excited about him. You could say that this president is tackling environmental regulations, if you're a supporter of the president. You could say that, in their perspective, he's talking straight talk. He's not giving political gobbledygook. What do you say to that, Tom? If someone who strongly supports the president says, look, we believe in different things than you guys believe, and what you guys are trying to call treason, we're calling progress. It's what we sent him there to do.
So let me just parse a little bit the positive things you're saying. You did say one thing that is true, which is that we have a low unemployment rate. That is true. Now let's talk for a second about who is getting the benefits of growth in American society. The average working person has not had a raise since 1980. So when we talk about a low unemployment rate, we are also talking about the vast majority of Americans who have not benefited since 1980 in terms of the growth and the productivity that this society has produced. If you put your money into the stock market in 1980, and I was a professional investor for a long time, you would have 20 times your money, but if you were a working person, the growth would have been 0.0. Last year, top of the market, full employment, America doing well. How much did the average wage go up? 0.0. So when you look at what's happening in the United States of America, we have seen a corporate takeover of our country. The benefits are going to the people associated with those corporations, and working people are getting the shaft.
Now what if a supporter of the president interrupted you and said, agree 100% with that? And by the way, over the last 30 plus years, you had two Democratic administrations, right? You had President Obama serve 2 terms, and you had President Clinton serve 2 terms. And so agree with you completely, and the corporate takeover is why you need people from outside of politics, and part of what Trump is trying to do around tariffs and other things is to try and shake that up so that there is some increase in wages and there is some shifting in the goods. Again, yeah, what would you say to them?
What I would say is this: let's give the devil his due. Mr. Trump is addressing real unhappiness and a real sense of being abandoned by the political class, and that's absolutely real. And if you go, I've been going around the country doing a 30-city town hall tour, and you absolutely hear it in every part of America that they feel like the inside the Beltway establishment has abandoned them and doesn't care about them. So give the devil his due. Mr. Trump said that. The problem is every prescription that he has is bad. And politically what he does is attack different parts of America to try and cover up his failings. So this week, after this failure in Helsinki, this disgraceful betrayal, he comes out and attacks Colin Kaepernick and starts talking about the national anthem to cover up his failure. So my answer for Mr. Trump is, yes, he did pinpoint and react to absolute despondency and desperation from working people in America, and I give him credit for it, but his solutions are worse. They exacerbate the problem, and if you look what he's actually doing for working people, he's attacking the right to organize. He is absolutely bowing down to the corporate class, and he's not going to help working people, and they absolutely deserve some representation.
Carl, Secretary of State Clinton was here yesterday, and one of her critiques of President Trump was not just his policies, but she said that in her mind, just as dangerous is that he's not serious about the job. He's not serious about meeting with someone like Putin and preparing properly. He's not serious about studying up on the economy and figuring out how to make long-term changes. I know you love history. I know you love history of politics and presidents. Is that a fair critique, that President Trump is not a serious person, and so forget policy differences, but just on that alone?
Yeah, look, I think there is something to it. But let's also look at the policies of the administration. An administration is not one person. It's the administration itself. Let's take President Trump on Russia. He has sanctioned a record number of the oligarchs. He has taken an aggressive, I think overly aggressive tone towards our allies in Europe to bulk up their military spending for NATO, whose purpose is to confront Russia. He, in my opinion, rightly said, reversed the policy of the previous administration. Previous administration said, we're going to help Ukraine by giving Ukraine non-lethal military support. And oh, incidentally, you're going to have to pick up the meals ready to eat and other equipment that we're sending in Poland because we don't want to send U.S. aircraft into Ukraine. And he said, I'm going to give lethal aid. First, the anti-tank missiles they wanted, and this week, $200 million of training, special radar that allows them to track where the artillery strikes are actually coming from, and some countermeasures and secure communications. So he's taking a tough attitude. He goes out and attacks their dream, the Russian dream of Nord Stream 2 being able to hook Germany. He goes out and attacks it. Now, what did the predecessor do? His predecessor let that all go forward. His predecessor sat there, and I'm sure having met Putin, I'm sure Putin was just shaking in his boots when he confronted him over in meddling in the U.S. elections and had sharp words with him in a meeting in Europe. I'm sure Putin left there just scared shitless. The previous administration should have taken tough action at any foreign actor attempting to meddle in our elections, and I hope to God that there's somebody at the NSA and the CIA and inside the security apparatus of the government now that is in charge of and is going to take tough measures if they try and meddle this time around. But look, you have to differentiate between, look, should he have met with Putin? I'm not really hung up on it. Should he have prepared for it and known what he was going in there trying to do? Absolutely. Should he have done it alone? Look, first of all, every president meets alone. Obama met with Putin alone with a translator. Do you know who the first president of the United States is who meets alone with foreign leaders? Thomas Jefferson. And how do we know it? We don't know it from any record from him. We know it because of the dispatches home from the British ambassador and the French minister and the Spanish minister during the crisis over the Louisiana Purchase, over the recession of Louisiana to France. We know because they report their private meetings with the President of the United States, who's threatening war to the French and the Spanish if it goes forward, and is telling the French, if you need help in Haiti, we're happy to put down the black insurrection in Haiti because it's in our interest not to have a black republic in the Caribbean, but you got to do something for us on Louisiana. So this has been happening forever. So these people who say, oh, we shouldn't have met with them alone, well, President Obama met with foreign leaders alone.
But why is it always an argument about what another president did? We have a right as American people to know what happened in that conversation. All
right, good.
We have a right to know.
Good. Well, first of all, the Constitution gives the president the right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. But you're right. If you want to have it, then let's be equal. What the hell did President Obama mean when he said, let me finish. Let me finish.
Shit now. We're dealing with a situation.
You know what a tell is?
Yes, I know what a tell is.
Yeah, a tell is what?
When you give something away that you're supposed to.
Yeah, well, you're giving away. I'm talking about a comparison here, and you interrupt me because you know it's not going to help you.
Hey guys, hang on.
If you want to be consistent.
Hey, Carl, hang on one second. Yeah. Hang on one second. One of the most important things we're going to do here today is have tough conversations about
civilized conversations.
All right, Chelsea.
So let me finish my point.
All right, you finish.
If you want to be consistent and say we want to know what Trump did there, then you have to also be willing to say, we want to know what Obama meant when he said to Lavrov, after the election, I'll have more flexibility. If we're going to be a country that is united, we can have big debates, but we ought to have the same standard on the same issue.
Chelsea, you want to jump in?
Yes, I do. First, you could say that Obama wasn't pro-Russia. Obama didn't do anything to help Russia. Obama did, and you constantly, Republicans constantly bringing up what Obama didn't do in comparison to what Trump did. Obama also didn't kiss Putin's ass in front of all of the American people.
You know what he did? You know what he did? You know what he did do?
Carl,
you know what he did do? He stood by while they took Crimea. He stood by while they took 2 provinces in Ukraine and refused to come to the aid of the Ukrainian people. He said, okay, we'll help you, but it's not going to be lethal aid that you need small arms and tactical weapons. We're going to give you meals ready to eat, but, oh, we can't be seen as being involved. So you will have, you know who picks up the equipment that we send them in Poland? Volunteer convoys of Ukrainian civilians have to go over there and pick it up because it's too difficult for their military to spread themselves too thin.
Carl,
the President of the United States has a responsibility to stand up against Russia when it violates our interests, whether they are Obama or Trump. And remember Bush, 2008, weak. They come into Georgia. What happens? President Bush calls up Putin and says, I am returning the U.S.-trained, U.S.-equipped, battle-hardened Georgian brigade to Tbilisi on U.S. military aircraft, and we're going to be sending supplies with them as well. And what happened? The Russians stopped because they respect strength.
Enough.
No.
Really, let us talk about now. Look, let's talk for a second about what we're really doing in foreign policy today. The policy of the Trump administration is overtly and publicly America first. We don't have allies. We have competitors. We don't like the Europeans. We don't like the Canadians. We don't like the Japanese. They're our foes. This is an idea that somehow America acts alone and somehow cooperation is bad. This is a zero-sum game. What you have, we have to take for us to grow. That is something that is not true in the real world. It's a destructive policy and one that is a bad idea. And it's one that flies contrary to everything that the United States has done as the leader of the free world since at least 1945. So when you talk about America first, to hell with our allies, we go it alone, we fight with people. Carl, you know that's not what America stands for. And you know, no, we listen to your path down history. Second thing, the President of the United States got on that stage and lied his ass off to the American people. He denied everything that the intelligence community says. That's not okay. So when we think about what's going on in the United States, this is not normal. This is not normal behavior, however much people in D.C. want to tell you it is. Breaking the law and lying to the American people is not normal.
Tom, question.
We're better than that.
Question you. If that is right, why does President Trump retain such strong support among Republicans?
So let's talk about that, because that's obviously something that remains true.
And not just strong support, but when you've seen people like Bob Corker from Tennessee, Jeff Flake from Arizona, Mark Sanford, who was with us from South Carolina, say something in opposition, you've seen them lose, right? So Republicans have voted at the ballot box several times to reinforce the president.
I think there are a couple things going on. I want to make a comparison to where we were with Richard Nixon in 1974. Before the Helsinki disaster for this president, 42% of Americans wanted him impeached and removed from office. That's before Helsinki last week. In March of 1974, Richard Nixon had 43% of Americans in exactly the same place. So when you ask me what's going on, I'd say, look, events are happening. I trust the American people. If you go around this country, it doesn't matter if they're Republicans or Democrats or independents. We are a decent, broad-minded, generous, brave people, and they're watching the events. So what I would say about this, Carlos, is an old saying about how a question to someone how he went bankrupt. How did I go bankrupt? Two ways. slowly and then all at once. And that's what's happening to this president. You're watching his support go slowly and then all at once, and it's going to be the events, just as it was with Mr. Nixon, where the American people decide, you know what, we can do better than this. And to be fair, the next president will be a conservative Republican from Indiana.
Wait, say that again?
If we assuming that they impeach Trump and Pence becomes vice president. Look, though, I want to go back to...
Do you believe that'll happen, Carl?
No, look...
If Democrats win the House and Senate...
No, they're not going to impeach Trump.
Because?
Well, first of all, it's going to require a two-thirds vote in the Senate. You think they're going to get two-thirds in the Senate? And second of all, you know, this, again, Pelosi and Schumer have a reason for thinking that it's a bad idea to bring up impeachment because it retards your ability to get there. And I want to say two things. I want to agree with you on the post-World War II consensus. And I think Trump is doing damage there. On the other hand, Democrats aren't necessarily in favor of the post-World War II consensus either. And I know that from an experience of having to fight for trade promotion authority and free trade agreements with some of the poorest countries in the world and having little to no Democratic support on it. But let's also, I want to go back to where you started this journey for you on impeachment, which was the firing of James Comey. That's shortly after that is when you started your impeachment effort. It's number one on
Carl, let me ask you a question. Are you telling me what I think?
Well,
I mean, that's really helpful.
I'm asking you because
what else do I think?
Well, because it's number one on your list on your website. Maybe I'm wrong. I thought you started off with the most important reason on your website for impeaching Trump was the Comey. Maybe I'm wrong, but I did go to your website, and you're right. I did waste an hour and a half.
Did you listen to the whole symposium?
You know, look, I listened to some of them, and then I looked at the list, and you collected every left-wing lunatic law professor in America.
I have a question. Do you really believe that Putin has nothing that he's blackmailing Trump with? You believe that's all made-up Democratic bullshit?
Look, I do think he doesn't have anything on him. Okay, because look, presidential campaigns leak. And if there was collusion or cooperation or they had something on them, the worst campaign in the history of America from leaking is the Trump campaign. And if there was something there, we'd know about it. And if there is something there,
well, I mean, 25 plus indictments kind of indicate something's going on.
Well, yeah, there are.
Including the head of the campaign.
Yeah, think about that. Think about that. Think about that for a minute. First of all, most of those indictments are of Russians, which we ought to indict. And second of all, the other indictments have to do with Paul Manafort and Rick Gates and their activity on behalf of Putin and Russian oligarchs in Ukraine. I've known Paul Manafort for 45 years. I've always thought he was a crook, but that doesn't tarnish Donald Trump. He made the mistake of hiring that lunatic for about 100 days as his campaign manager, but the things that Bob Mueller is getting him on have to do with things that happened in 2005 and 2006 and 2008. And let me finish directly to your point. If there is something there, I have ultimate confidence that Bob Mueller is going to find it out. And
if he finds it, do you think we'll end up seeing the president impeached?
Yeah, look, if there is a material difference in what we know today, the president's posture with the American people and his ability to be impeached is going to increase dramatically. But again, I would make the point. That campaign, look, when you got like idiots like George Papadopoulos and Carter Page, wannabes. Look, I've been in a bunch of presidential campaigns. There are always lunatic wannabes who want to get involved. And he got a bunch of lunatic wannabes that he let him into his
campaign. So Clinton was the director of national, the NSC director. I mean, that is not, or NSA director.
So wait a second, you guys.
And what did he get in trouble for?
This is beside the point, may I point out?
No.
Let's talk for 1 second about impeachment. And let's talk about all the law professors, which Mr. Rove has decided they're left-wing, and so therefore they don't count, and their research doesn't matter.
No,
stop.
There are lots of other conservative and moderate law
professors.
There are
things. Mr. Mueller is a criminal investigator, investigating criminal charges. Impeachment is a political process. Some of the things in the Constitution that are specified as being impeachable are not criminal statutes. So, for instance, it says in the Constitution that you are not allowed to take up any payment whatsoever from a foreign government. That is not a criminal statute. That is in the Constitution.
Well, quote the Constitution correctly. It says emolument, which has a specific meaning in the time of the Constitution, which was a payment from a foreign leader to an official of the American government.
Which is exactly
direct payment.
What happens every single day for this president, and we all know it, which is why he wouldn't give up his business, and he takes a payment from a foreign government every single day. It's illegal. We don't need Mr. Mueller to tell us that. It happens all the time, and people who ignore it, I guess, don't want to have the outcome. But this president has clearly met the criteria to be impeached. And the question is it important enough, not for the people in D.C., not for the establishment, do the American people care enough to say he's got to go? Because he will stay until the people like you raise your voice and say, no, this is too bad. We want to protect our democracy. We want him out.
Chelsea, where do you think we go from here? Where would you like to see us go?
I'm all for it. I would love, my fantasy is to see Donald Trump dragged out of the White House in his boxer shorts, with his, little hair.
No, Chelsea, no.
and landing in the Rose Garden. You know what I mean? I want him naked and humiliated because of what he's done to this country, and it's an embarrassing time. And I totally respect and support anything Tom Styer does, so I'm all about that. But my focus has been to try and get people out to vote, to galvanize people, to understand that your voice is important, that it matters, and that if you want to be represented in this government, you have to vote and you have to participate and get involved and stay involved. The country is getting browner and gayer, and you better hop on board.
All right.
Don't count it. Don't count on that, incidentally. I come from a red state. Now we're a little difficult.
We know.
We're a little difficult with math in Texas, but we have a higher percentage of the population in Texas that's African American than the rest of the country. We have a significantly higher percentage of people in Texas who are Hispanic than the rest of the country. We have a higher percentage of the people in Texas who are Asian American than the rest of the country, which it took me a while to figure it out. But that means we got a smaller percentage, much smaller percentage of people who are Anglo. And yet we are a deep red state because we're an inclusive party. We're an inclusive party. We're an inclusive party in Texas that nominates and runs as its candidates people who represent the diversity of Texas. And so you can't guarantee on democracy.
Carl, what do you say? Hold on a second. What do you say to the critique that you just heard in the audience?
I didn't hear him.
Gerrymandering. What do you say?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Watch the governor's race this fall, which will be run by Republican by about 20 points. You can't gerrymander the whole goddamn state. Every statewide election since 1994 has been won by Republican in Texas, and you can't gerrymander. In fact, when Bush ran for re-election in '98 was the year that we took over every statewide, all 28 statewide elected officials, and a majority of them were not Anglo men. They were women, African Americans, Latinos.
Let's talk for a second about participation. So our organization specifically is doing the biggest voter mobilization for people under 35. The generation under 35 is the most diverse in American history. It's the biggest generation in America, bigger than the boomers, and they vote at half the rate of other American citizens. So it is really important for everybody in this crowd to know that if that generation, and I have 4 kids, 24, 26, 28, 30. If you guys show up, we have a different America.
Tom,
but no, I want to make one other point, Carlos. Okay. But I want to also address this question about gerrymandering, because we just heard a point
about voter suppression while you're at it, will you please?
Because voter suppression, voter intimidation, getting people off the rolls. There is an absolute campaign to remove the franchise from Americans across this country, run by the Republican Party. Mr. Rove will deny it, but it's systematic, it's ongoing, it's been taken to court. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, but there is an attempt to remove the franchise and have the least democratic democracy they can have. We're doing the exact opposite. We feel the more people who show up, registered, engaged, and participate, the better the answer will be. We believe in the broadest democracy. It's a stark choice. Democracy or corpocracy?
Hey, Tom, very direct question. You going to run for president in 2020?
Listen, you guys, no one knows. Carl doesn't know, Chelsea doesn't know, Carlos doesn't know, and I don't know what's going to happen on November 6th. We really don't. No one can figure out where this election's going. I promise I will be fully committed to social justice on November 7th, But I have no idea
He's
where
running.
this country's
He's running.
stand.
Applaud. He's
Carl,
running.
let me say this. Carl knows so much about me. He met me about 45 minutes ago.
He read it on your
This is the
website.
second time he's told me what I think.
I got a file folder full of clips on it that were given to me by my friends at the CIA and the NSA. Really interested in reading your
take
email.
on voter suppression. What do you have to say about voter suppression? And do you think Democrats are as guilty of it?
But baloney.
Or guilty at all?
Baloney. In Texas, for example, we have early voting. We have mail-in postcards. What we do have is a prescription against. We had a terrible scandal in South Texas a couple of years ago, with literally dozens of impoverished people who were stuck, who were ill, who were being voted consistently in Democratic primaries on behalf by somebody who'd pull up, have them sign a blank sheet, or better yet, forge their signature. And so we had to pass some protections to require, if you're going to help somebody get a ballot and vote it for them, you've got to identify
Carl,
who they are.
you don't feel like you've seen the problems of gerrymandering or
look,
suppression?
Gerrymandering has been going on since Elbridge Gerry was governor of Massachusetts in 1802. And if the look, I live in Texas. When I moved to Texas, they hunted Republicans with dogs. There were, in the Texas legislature, out of 150 members, we had 13 Republicans. You want to see redistricting? See the Democrats do it to you. Do we do it to them? Yeah. But in Illinois and California, they passed a commission. And what happened after the commission made its findings? The Democrats went out and gave a series of interviews about how they jimmied the whole process in order to gerrymander districts. The only people in America who seem to be able to do this in a nonpartisan way are the people in Iowa. And maybe that's because they're so goddamn polite out there. Everywhere else, it's politics. And that means they screw us in New York and Illinois, and we return the favor in Texas.
All right, hang on one second. Guys, I'm actually going to come to the audience because I can tell that everybody's engaged and people have questions to ask, and I love that. That's why we're doing OZY Fest. So let's get a couple of questions of folks. I see one right here. I'm going to repeat the question once you ask it.
Yeah, but I got to turn them.
So good question here. Said thank you for coming out. Thank you for the conversation. Wanted to ask Chelsea and Tom, how do you expect to attract not just the Democratic base, but how do you expect to attract Republicans in this November and also presumably in 2020?
My biggest goal personally, and with the people and the organizations that I've aligned myself with, is to get people that have not voted in the last couple of elections, or that would be first-time voters. That is the generation that represents our future. Those are the people that will be in charge of everything in years to come. So it's about getting people activated. I'm not necessarily trying to convert people that are Republican to the Democratic side. I'm trying to find young people who can vote down ballot and find one issue that they care about, whether it's legalization of marijuana, whether it's women having the right to choose, whether it's about gun reform. You find one issue that you're passionate about, and you find the candidate that espouses those views. And that's how you get started. And that's all I'm trying to implore with young people, is to go out and find somebody who's never voted and get them to vote.
So let me say this, that I think what Chelsea is talking about is trying to get higher turnout, and I completely support that, and we spend a lot of time on it. But I think something else, too. We have two things we ask in every statement that we make, which is, one, are we telling the truth? Are we standing up for the democracy and the American people? And that is actually, we piss off the Democratic establishment, too. What we are trying to do is go directly to Americans who we believe on both sides of the aisle to be deeply patriotic and deeply decent, and say to them, there is a much more positive way for this country to grow. There's a much more just and equal way, and we're really trying to go that way as opposed to old-time, the ideas of the 1930s fighting the ideas of the 1980s. We believe that the American people are much closer than you would believe by listening to the conversation in Washington, D.C.
I'm going to grab another question over there, Carl, unless you want to get in on this.
Well, elections are won not by simply motivating and energizing the base, but by persuading people who don't necessarily didn't share your opinions in the past election. Trump won because he won people who'd voted for Barack Obama once or twice, because he represented to them some kind of change. As Tom so eloquently said, he was speaking on their behalf, and they thought that they had been forgotten by the political establishment. So whichever party figures that out and makes that the core message of its campaigns, we're all in this together, and our focus is to persuade people who are in the center of American politics, swing voters to come our way. They're going to win elections. The reason that John Kerry lost in 2004 was he focused only on the base of the Democratic Party. The base of either party is not enough to win a national election.
You know, there will be a very good test of this in Georgia, where Stacey Abrams is the candidate for governor and who's embracing the theory that Chelsea's said that a more powerful opportunity will be to mobilize first-time voters and lapsed voters, and it'll be interesting to see. You may end up being right that the reality is Obama got crossover voters, Trump did, Reagan did, Clinton and W did, but it'll be interesting to see if that happens. That would represent a new day. Question over here.
So it was said that in North Carolina that there were 11 districts that were gerrymandered only because they couldn't find ways to do more. So kind of returning back to that gerrymander questioning, if the algorithms and the technology exist to do this, would you support an algorithm or technology that would make it a fair electoral process for all that are involved, whether that means you win or lose?
Who wants to jump in?
I think that's a question for Karl Rove.
Look, there's no question we would. What we are pushing for every single day is a broader, more inclusive democracy. And when we go out, we registered 1.3 million people in 2016. They were overwhelmingly young. They were overwhelmingly people of color. We want to have the democracy where the votes count and the voices are heard across society, because that's what we believe. We get the smartest and the fairest answers. So of course we want it to be fair.
Yeah, we want it to be fair, but it's easy to say fair. It's hard to define fair. The Democrats, for example, have been pushing in some of these lawsuits an algorithm, which is voter efficiency. And the problem with it is that political scientists have taken the algorithm and run it, and in order to meet the test of that algorithm, you'd have to redistrict after every election, because the previous election's results would be, quote, would have a determinative effect on what's fair. Look, I don't have an answer for it. I don't.
That is an answer.
No, look. Yeah, magic answer. Well, let's put out the magic answer and subject it like the people who've advocated voter efficiency, and we will all be able to determine that it doesn't provide a fair system.
Quick question, and all three of you. If we had a constitutional convention, we could start over a little bit. We could make 2 or 3 key changes into how the democracy runs. What kind of changes would you make? Would you lower the voting age? Would you allow voting for 2 weeks? Would you get rid of the Electoral College? Would you double down on the Electoral College? Would you make the presidency one 6-year term? Chelsea, what would you like to see if we could shake up the rules of democracy? What would you love to see?
I would like every person that's an American citizen to have the right to vote and not have to fight for it. I would like that. That should be your right. It should be a national holiday. People shouldn't be suppressing votes. People shouldn't be requiring 2 or 3 forms of ID, and they certainly shouldn't be accusing of people voting twice. People can barely get to their voting places once. Nobody's voting twice. Okay, that's just stupid, and it's another argument that has no grounding. So I want people to be able to exercise their rights, and I want to motivate as many people as I can to have that and to be empowered in that, to know that there are people that are on your side that are fighting for you. Don't become fatigued and don't let them defeat you.
Tom, what would you, if national holiday, easier access to voting?
So obviously we want bigger turnout, but if there were 2 things I could change, the first thing is corporations aren't people. We got to get the money out of the politics. And as long as corporations can control what happens, then we're going to go through the mortgage meltdown. We're going to see banks pay $234 billion in fines, and no one's going to jail. We got to get the money out of politics, and we got to get rid of the Electoral College, because it's a hangover from centuries ago for the wrong reasons. The American people, it should be 1 person, 1 vote for president.
Karl, if you could, constitutional convention, you could change a couple of rules, what would you change?
I like the Constitution as it is. And the idea of saying we got to get corporate money out of it, well, what the hell about getting money from rich people out of it as well? What about that? Shouldn't we, if we're gonna say that the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times have the ability to influence elections through their editorials, isn't that an unfair use of corporate power? Maybe we should restrict the First Amendment as well. What about it? Should Styer be able to spend $40 million and I can only spend 100,000? No, 100, period. So, look, these are easy answers to give, easy answers to tell, but we are a great country that doesn't seem to realize that it's great and is very actively tearing itself apart by being involved in tribalism on both the right and the left. And there's going to come a time when a leader emerges who unites us as a country. We've done this before, and we've come to a moment where the common sense of the American people reasserted itself, and we got ourselves back together. I'm counting on that moment.
So can I just make a point? This is the classic false equivalence, just the way Mr. Rove described gerrymandering as both sides. Actually, if you read the Wall Street Journal, the Republicans have a computer program to maximize gerrymandering. He didn't say he was against gerrymandering. He said both sides do it. What's really going on in the United States is working people are getting a bad deal. There has been a long time, 40-year attack on the rights of working people to organize and be heard. And it's very sustained, it's very successful, and it continues. And as long as corporations can dominate the money and are treated literally as corporations are people, then we are not going to be able to run this society the way it was set up, so every single person counts the same.
Look, I'm involved in a super PAC, American Crossroads Senate Leadership Fund. I'm a volunteer. Don't make any money off of it. I'm a volunteer. I don a saffron robe and get my begging bowl out and go ask people for money. You know who doesn't give money? Corporations, because they're scared to death of offending their customers. You know who gives money? Rich people. Now, Styer was the biggest donor in 2016, I believe. I'm trying to find somebody who'll be a bigger donor than him in 2018. But I haven't found him yet, but I'm going to keep trying, Tom. But this idea that somehow or another that corporate money has infiltrated our politics, since 1903, corporations have not been able to give to federal campaigns. And I will just tell you from practical experience, it is impossible to get money, nearly impossible to get money from any corporation for a super PAC.
Hey, hang on one second, guys. I'm going to keep the questions moving.
I was just wondering, we kind of saw an uptick in people identifying themselves as libertarian and green in this last election. How do you think this presidential term will affect the two-party system going forward?
Chelsea, I'm going to go to you first on this. You think we'll see more third-party candidates or more new and different kinds of candidates?
Yeah, I mean, this feels like the death cough of the Republican Party. You know, I mean, this kind of candidate, these politics, the NRA, it's so dirty and so nasty that if we're the greatest country in the world, we allow people with semi-automatic rifles to walk into our schools and shoot our children. Yet, you want to protect children's rights and you don't want women to have a choice to abort a baby, yet you're okay with children that are already born being killed in classrooms. I mean, this is disgusting. It is disgusting. So I don't remember the question, but anyway. So, I mean, I think Republicans aligning themselves with alleged child molesters, allowing, the NRA to completely control what they do and they don't do with legislation is pretty much all the information any parent would need.
Carl, how do you think about where the Republican Party is? Because Trump was clearly not the establishment choice. He clearly has said that he wants to drain the swamp. He wants to remake over the party. And Chelsea says, I look at that, I see that, and I see the death cough, and I see the Republican Party going south. And Trump supporters would say, no, he's the only thing that kept it from irrelevance, and we wouldn't have won, and we were on our way out. How do you see the Republican Party's future?
Let me first respond quickly to the question. I think that the strong vote for Green and Libertarian and third-party candidates was an expression of people's dissatisfaction with both major party candidates. I had friends who went in and voted Libertarian just simply because they couldn't bring themselves to vote for Trump or Clinton.
Your former boss told me that just 2 months ago on stage.
I'm not repeating what he said.
Okay.
So I think that whether or not the two parties are able to scratch the itch of the American people is going to be whether or not in the next election we see two things. One is increased turnout. We had increased turnout from 2012 to 2016, but not to the extent that we had in previous elections. And second of all, whether or not they nominate candidates who people walk in and say, we've had a tradition in this country which has been healthy, that people would walk in and say, I'm voting for X, but you know what? I'd be okay if Y won. And in this election, we had people walk into the booth saying, I don't want either one of these people to be elected, but I got to vote for one of them.
Quick up and down. Could a third-party candidate win the presidency in 2020?
No.
Third-party candidate, Chelsea, could a third-party?
I think so, yeah.
Tom?
Nope.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, remember, Ross Perot got 19% of the vote, in the Electoral College, 0 votes.
Yep.
So I want to say one thing. When you think about 2016, I hate agreeing with Karl Rove about anything, but I agree with him on this. 2 people won.
Don't tell anybody, incidentally. Don't tell anybody that we agree.
2 people won the election in 2016. One was Bernie Sanders. He's not a Democrat. And one was Donald Trump. He's not a Republican. The American people were sending a message to the establishment. You are not answering our questions. You are not dealing with our truth. So if parties that don't tell the truth to the American people are going to diminish and go away. So it's going to be a question of the rebirth and finding a voice that answers the question about what are we doing in the 21st century together to have the kind of country that we were designed to have.
All right, I'm going to try and get 1 or 2 more questions in here. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. I just wanted to, I saw Tom's opinion on it, but I just wanted to get everybody's opinion on the abolishment of the Electoral College and have a 1 vote from New York versus 1 vote from Texas. If I could just get the panel's opinion on that.
Chelsea, you want to go first? How do you think about it?
Well, you're saying that each state would have 1 vote?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean,
it'd be 1 vote
sorry.
for the whole country.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm like, what? Yes, no, I mean, I support that. I mean, the Electoral College isn't representative of the, the majority of the population. So it's antiquated.
First of all, it's never going to happen because you have to get a certain number of states to approve any amendment. And you think South Dakota, North Dakota, and Wyoming, et cetera, are going to give up their disproportionate influence? Hell no. And second of all, I think it'd be bad for the country, because I think it is good for us to have a 2-party system. Think about Bill Clinton when he didn't expand the Democratic electorate. He got the same percentage of the vote in 1992 that Michael Dukakis got in 1988. And yet the Electoral College gave him a big number that caused the American people in part to say, he's our president. And I would much rather have the stability of a 2-party system than the instability of how many governments have we had in Italy, multi-party democracy.
And Carl, you definitely see it as instability. You don't see it as vibrancy and new ideas and a freshness and challenge. If we were to
not in our system. Think about how difficult it is to pass something when you have 2 parties in Congress. Try having 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. Particularly if they had substantial numbers.
Okay, I'm going to take a couple more questions. I appreciate you guys. I'm going to take a couple more questions. So a young man right here, and then I'm going to come out there.
So, okay. There we go. So I want to read a quote by Andrew Breitbart. He said, "The people who have money every 4 years at the last possible second are told, you need to give millions of dollars because these 4 counties in Ohio are going to determine the election." I'm saying, why didn't we invest 20 years ago in a movie studio in Hollywood? Why didn't we invest in creating television shows? Why didn't we create institutions that reflect and affirm that which is good about America? Now, I think Michael Bloomberg just said he was going to donate $80 million in 2018. And I question how much that'll do as opposed to investing in something that might be able to set the stage for the next 20 years, the next 40 years, get young people really excited about America's progress. What do you guys think about that?
So what we believe gets people involved in the political system is a conversation with other people in their community. And that's what we spend our time trying to empower and enable. We believe that young people, if they have a serious conversation with someone else about politics, the reason young people don't vote is they don't like the system, they don't believe it's responsive, they don't like either party. When they get involved in a conversation, we find they're twice as likely to show up at the polls. And you are changing the world because once somebody shows up at the polls once, they're a voter. And that's really what we're trying to do, is go back to old-fashioned American democracy, conversations amongst communities about what we care about the most. And that's what we believe is the revolution. Young people talking to each other, the passions of young people being expressed politically and at the polls. We think that's what saves America.
Guys, I hate to do this. This is so strong and such a strong conversation, but we have to bring it to a close. And so I'm going to ask each of our folks here to give me one final big thought. Carl, I'm going to start with you. Chelsea, come to you. And Tom, finish your final big thought.
Well, I want to ruin everybody's day by agreeing with Tom Styer on something.
Especially mine.
Yeah, exactly. I'm leaving you with a farewell gift that's sort of like a little turd out there. Andrew Breitbart was a friend of mine, and he was right that politics is downwind, downstream, if you will, from culture. But I think Tom is absolutely right about the essence of politics, and it was actually, we have all this fancy stuff, and Tom's underwriting a bunch of it, big data and micro-targeting and focus groups and polls. But the essence of American politics was outlined in a simple letter by a tall, lanky lawyer from Sangamon County, Illinois in 1840. He said, make a perfect list of the voters, ascertain with certainty for whom they will vote, have the undecideds talked to by someone they hold in confidence, and on Election Day, make certain that every Whig is brought to the polls. Now, Abraham Lincoln was a great president, but he was also a pretty good practical politician. And the most important part of what he had to say was, have the undecideds talked to by someone they hold in confidence. And all of this big data and all this technology is making it possible for both political parties to get in a race to returning to exactly what Tom talked about. Because the party that does the best job of reaching out, not just simply to its base, but to people who are up for grabs in American politics and making a cogent argument about what their future is going to look like under this party or that, is the party that's going to win the next majority. We're in a period of indecision. We've been here for probably going on 20-some-odd years. It's happened before in American politics. You can't have a period of instability like this that doesn't ultimately end in one party dominating it for some number of decades as opposed to the other party, and that's the race that both parties are on now.
Chelsea?
I would like to see Citizens United overturned. I would like to find candidates that support that. I don't think there's anybody in this crowd. There are a few families across this country, the Soroses, the Koch brothers, on both sides that give hundreds of millions of dollars to candidates. I don't think anyone in this crowd wants to spend their free time and their money that they've earned supporting candidates. They should be publicly funded elections so that we can get all of this corporate money out of politics, so that you can't buy your way into an administration, which is exactly what's happening now. There is no reason we want our representatives not working on the weekends, instead campaigning and trying to fundraise. Why do we want them doing that? It makes most sense to have publicly funded elections, and we would be so much better represented by people who really want to be in office and aren't doing favors for their corporate partners.
So I just want to make two quick points. One is, we're trying to impeach this president because he is lawless, reckless, and dangerous for America. But long term, what we want is to recognize the rights of American citizens in the 21st century. And what that means is, how do we translate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness into this century under these terms? And I think it's different from the 18th century when the Declaration was written, and we're talking about things like an absolute right to health care, an absolute right to clean air and clean water, an absolute right to free, quality public education through college, and an absolute right to protect the dignity of every American, which I never thought I'd have to say in 2018, but it is impossible to watch our politics today and not realize that various communities, the African-American community, women, the LGBTQ community, the Latino community, the immigrant community, are under attack by people who think they can divide us in order to win. And so what I look forward to, the big point about this from my standpoint is, we will win by pulling together and realizing that Americans are good-hearted, brave, generous people. This is our century.
Guys, big hand. What a terrific way to kick off day 2 of OZY Fest. Karl Rove, Chelsea Handler, Tom Styer starting off strong. We're going to take a 2-second break, and we'll be back with Malcolm Gladwell. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.